ahead and get started. So today we're going to talk about ethics. Hopefully all of you have completed the ethics survey already because we're going to talk about that. Just some announcements. Today is the last lecture of the required 5 introductory lectures for those of you who are new. So we won't have any more lectures in this room the rest of the semester. We will start the week after design reviews. We will start the leadership workshop series if any of you are interested in participating in that. Probably you guys already have enough lecture credits, but if you're interested, you're more than welcome to sign up for that. There'll be 2 sessions, one at 4:30 and one at 5:30. Design reviews are next week. There's no lectures at all so that you can prepare for those. There is a session going on right now that you can look at. It'll be posted as of Wednesday about preparing for the design review. The email also had strategies for what you should be doing to prepare. You can reserve rooms like 1098 B and C if you want to practice doing your presentation with your team. I highly recommend doing that. Also, requirements for getting design docs posted so that our design reviewers can have access to those as well. If you are somebody who's taking this for 2 credit hours and needs more lectures, you can do skill sessions that we have. And then also, starting in April, we'll have 3 more lectures that you could go to if you were interested. Okay? You can also, if it makes sense, view some of the concurrent lectures from this professional series and also get credits that way. So there should be plenty of opportunities to get that. Any questions about any of this? Yes?
Does the leadership workshop series count towards if we need 2 credit hours?
Yes. Yeah. So you actually get 8 credits for doing the leadership because you have to do some outside work for it. You go to 4 sessions. So it's March 2nd, 9th, and then after spring break for 2 more. But yeah, those count. So lectures, skill sessions, those all count as credits for doing that. Okay? Any other questions? All right. So goals for today, kind of understand everyday ethics in design. So the focus really isn't necessarily on kind of those catastrophic challenger kinds of things, although there are issues that we might confront that could end up being kind of have a lot of harm related to that. But just even the everyday kind of decisions we make in design and the ethical considerations related to that. We're also going to talk about kind of a framework for making ethical decisions. Not necessarily that that is something you do on an ongoing basis, but if you practice going through that thought process, you'll be better prepared when you're facing those situations potentially in the future. And then we're going to talk about people first language at the end. For those who are watching the videotape, please complete the survey before you go on with this lecture. So, okay. So what is ethics? Code of how you do work. Yep. That's true. How does it differ from morality? Often we use the same words they have different meanings, but we often use them interchangeably, and I think we will a little bit here. Ethics is the theory of how to act. So it's more of the frameworks we use in making the decisions. Morality has to do with actually behavior conforming to accepted moral standards. So, there is a distinguished, philosophers would distinguish between these. Generally, we kind of use them together. A lot of what I think too is that the way in which we think about ethics is organized in certain kinds of ethical frameworks, like utilitarianism or codes of conduct. And so we'll talk about what those implications are for us as designers, many as professionals, and many of whom are engineers. So there are a lot of different frameworks or influences as we make ethical decisions. So up here are a number of different ethical frameworks that might influence how we think about and make everyday ethical decisions, whether they be within design or just in our personal lives. So we may have these ways of thinking that guide us, but then we also have cultural, family, religious, other kinds of influences that impact how we make decisions. So it's not just one way of thinking, it's actually multiple ways of thinking that influence how we make ethical decisions. So being aware of how these things influence and change our perspective. Specifically, we're concerned not only how maybe our personal ethics, but as professionals, we're obligated to consider additional kinds of frameworks and codes as we make decisions in design. Professional ethics, so, is a body of philosophy that guides a person in their professional capacity. And so, as a profession, as a professional, and the attributes of a profession are that it requires extra training. There's usually a body that oversees the work. So many of us are already in a profession or will become professionals when we graduate. And so as kind of in the realm of the work that we do as designers, as engineers, as other professionals, it's important that we're aware of those extra responsibilities. So a lot of the professional societies have codes of ethics that guide. You could also have other codes of ethics that you might be participating in, like within your company. There may be a code of ethic or that you are agreeing to participate and to follow as a member of that organization. You can actually, within your teams, you may have some formal or informal codes of conduct or ethics even within your EPICS teams or your work teams. There could be some things that you explicitly identify as ways of operating. And we used to have EPICS teams go through and actually develop this code of conduct. But whether you do it formally or informally, there probably are guidelines to how you think about this. All of them will be slightly different, but there's usually some things that they have in common. Each profession has a code of conduct. Psychology, education, audiology, and engineering. Looking at engineering, how many people have seen this code of conduct before? Is this new? Oh, okay. All right. So there actually are, as engineers, a code of ethics that we are expected to follow, and especially if you're a professional engineer, you are agreeing to kind of follow these guidelines. So the first one, hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. perform services only in your area of competence. Other ones there related to that. Which ones of these things do you think, as even within the design teams within EPICS, are important to follow? Yes.
Definitely the first one.
Okay.
Yeah, I think avoiding deceptive acts.
Okay. Where might this come to play? Where would you maybe start to look at this and think in your EPICS team might? Yes.
I was going to say the second one. You start next week.
Perform. Okay. So how might that affect you as students on your EPICS teams? Yes.
We need to make sure to ask for help if we don't know what we're doing or something.
Absolutely. Need to ask for help if you don't know what you're doing. Can you guys, is anybody a professional engineer and can sign drawings? Or, you know, nobody right in this room yet is one, right? And so those are things to think about as far as what you are able to do, you know, as a student. So you're not actually yet quite in that professional realm, but still these are aspects that we are really obligated to follow as designers. Because one of the things that is a characteristic of a profession is that there is that expectation of public trust. So when you're designing for your community partner, there is an expectation that you are looking out for their welfare and that they are placing trust in your ability. And so it's important to think about these different kind of aspects as you do that. So in addition to all of the other kinds of frameworks that might influence how you think and make decisions, when you think about professional decisions, you have also kind of guidelines from your profession or your codes of conduct from those different professional groups that you might be a part of. There are also aspects that really influence how we think about what is ethical and what are the right decisions to make in design, as far as what are standards, regulations, what are considered to be good design practice. So becoming a competent and ethical designer really goes beyond just even understanding the codes, but it's actually understanding what's expected of you as a professional in your field. So really thinking about all of these different things as we make decisions. But this is kind of how do you navigate through this? And this can be pretty complicated. So we could go back to the codes, right? And think about, well, what would the code of conduct say? But often the codes don't really address all the issues. So what a code of conduct does not do, because they are developed by the society typically, usually in response to maybe an issue that's happened. Okay, you can almost look at a number of them. So to some degree, they tend to be a little bit more reactive than proactive in thinking about what are the issues. So they don't cover all possible situations. They don't necessarily address issues associated with emerging technology. You as individuals are moral reasoning individuals, and you have that capacity. It doesn't replace your ability to do that. And it also doesn't necessarily resolve conflicts between competing goods and values. So I mean, the first one, hold paramount safety, welfare, and health. Sometimes those can be in conflict with each other. You could have two goods, values there but actually finding out. Think about more energy efficient vehicles. So that's good for the environment. That's a good thing, right? But what is one strategy for getting a more energy efficient vehicle? Reduce weight, perhaps. But then you might be at higher risk because it weighs less. Some of the other strategies, Habitat for Humanity, when they were trying to design a more energy efficient home, what is the mission of Habitat for Humanity? It's affordable housing. What might be the conflict between more energy efficient home and affordable housing? At least right now, right? A lot of the innovations that allow it to be a more energy efficient home costs more. Now maybe over the long run, it may be less expensive for the homeowner, but can they afford it initially? So are you making it more difficult for them to actually participate? So these are some of the things we deal with as designers all the time in kind of finding, those strategies. So to assist to think about that, I guess, so other kinds of ethical situations that you might encounter in your EPICS teams. Anybody have any kinds of issues? I don't know if the survey sparked some things. Actually, all of the scenarios from the survey were prompted from real EPICS ethical situations. They're slightly modified to protect the innocent, but actually all of them had some basis in an issue that arose in EPICS. So what are some of the things? What are some ethical decisions you either might or could encounter on your teams? Any of you guys dealing with issues related to safety, sustainability, user friendliness, animal welfare, ergonomics? Yes?
Our team is currently working on cleaning the water that exits a chemistry lab and making sure that it's safe for the environment once it leaves the lab.
Okay. So safety related to cleaning the water after it leaves a chemistry lab. So safety, health and welfare, all of those things related to that. Any other issues? Any other sustainability? Any team have a focus of sustainability on what they're doing? So hopefully we'll come back to this as far as you might have some more ideas of potential. Because what often happens in ethics is what happens when we think about a DFMEA. How can we design to minimize some of the ethical issues that might come about? So being aware of them at the beginning can actually help us have better designs if we think about them. So if you can think about how I might address, and why might user friendliness, for example, be tied to an ethical issue? Yes? Right, so not everybody has access, or even thinking about like universal design. The ethics of universal design, making it accessible for as many people as possible. So thinking about that. Okay. One of the other issues is thinking about, so it was paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. Is it possible to make something 100% safe? No. And I hear teams often say, you know, safety is our number one priority, which is great. That needs to be a concern, but how can you, where do you find out what is safe enough? What are issues that go into thinking about safety? Think about the DFMEA and how you thought about those risks. What are aspects associated with safety to take into consideration? What were the things you thought about with DFMEA? Anybody have it in their notes and can look back? Perhaps, yes. How likely it is to occur, yes. What's the other aspect? Severity, right? And then the other one was observable detection. Often, too, there are times we assume a certain amount of safety. And so whether or not our perception of what something is safe enough is actually something that's important to take into consideration. And so our ability to truly assess whether or not something's safe. We make assumptions about products we buy as being regulated or monitored to make sure. And so those kinds of assumptions go into. So how equipped is your user in being able to assess the risk? Those are other questions to ask related to that. So it's not, you can't just go to the code and say, oh, well, the code says hold paramount. You've got to be considering this as you make design decisions. So we have a process for moral decision making, and it looks a lot like design, where our input is, for example, the case, and this is from work by Vanderpool and Royalkers. And so they were looking at cases and how to go through that process. So the first step is actually identifying what is the moral problem and stating that. The next is doing a problem analysis, which is identifying stakeholders, figuring out what the moral values are that are relevant and the relevant facts associated with that. Kind of sounds like some of the design tasks we did, right? Then develop options for action. Evaluate those options using ethical judgment, and then reflecting back on that. So very much like design process, this cycle is also iterative, and so that you can go back and you may get some new information that you feed back into the cycle. Now, the one thing that's a little different for us in EPICS, this isn't just a case. These are real life situations we're applying in EPICS. And the other thing is we've got to do follow through, which actually is maybe another step when we think about ethics, is ethical courage. Do you have the courage to do what's right, even if there's some resistance to doing that? So it's not just a theoretical discussion. There actually are real life consequences to these decisions that we make. So one of the things related to ethical judgment are the different ethical frameworks, and these are the formal ones that you might take into consideration, like utilitarianism, where it's which option will produce the most good for the most people. Or you might be looking at justice, where which option treats people the way I want to be treated, or even virtue, as far as which one demonstrates any of the virtues related to that. So in Europe, this scenario should look familiar. It was part of the ethics survey. where your student design team is asked to design a new car for children with physical and cognitive disabilities to race down the hill. And based on the suggestion of adults, you have added spring tension to the child's steering wheel in order to simulate the feeling of driving and make the child's experience more realistic and fun. The child will not have the ability to control the car, only the illusion of control. Before the first test run with an adult and a 14-year-old child on board, you hear the child's parents say, tell the child to be careful and to drive safely. The parent turns to you, explains that because of a cognitive disability, the child won't likely understand the difference anyway, and asks you to tell the child that the front steering wheel is actually functional. The request that you lie to the child would take advantage of the child's disability, and it creates the possibility that the child would feel responsible if they were to lose a race or have an accident. So would you lie to the child? And this really happened. For those of you on the car team, this really happened. Well, close to it. Situation. How many people would lie? How many people wouldn't lie? Okay. What are the ethical issues here? Why? Okay, for those of you who said you would lie, why would you lie? Yes?
I mean, I think I would yield to whatever the parent says, and it was their decision.
Okay. So what is the value that we're looking at with that? You yield to the parent's decision. So,
They know the child best.
okay. So recognizing that the child knows, that the parent knows the child best, but also honoring parent-child relationship, right? That value of doing that. Yes?
I think because the car is designed that way to give the child illustration that he or she can actually drive the car, so why don't you just go with that and keep that, dream of that child. It's like Santa Claus, you don't really...
Kind of like Santa Claus, yes, as far as the illusion of, because do parents ever lie to their children? Sometimes, maybe, for these, situations here. But why not? For those of you who said they wouldn't lie, why not? Yes?
I mean, it just seems like you're taking advantage of the fact that the child has a disability.
Okay.
I don't know if that's really the right thing to do.
Okay. So it feels like you're taking advantage of the child's disability. Yes?
But the goal of the car is so that the child has fun, and if the child finds out that it's not actually him steering it, then it's kind of going to take away the fun for him if feels like he was lied to. I feel like the child would still have fun if he wasn't in control of it.
Okay.
And now you are taking away that fun because you're kind of saying, hey, we lied to you, and
All right.
ruin trust. I guess.
So as far as the child's having fun, if they found out that you were lying, then that would take away the fun. Yes?
I would just tell the parents to let the kid tell them themselves, because why do I need to be the one to lie to them?
Okay. All right, so you're coming up, so this kind of set up a situation where there's two alternatives, right? You lie or don't lie. But actually, there are other alternatives to this, and anybody on the car team can probably even suggest other ones related to that. So let's look here. What I want you to do is the handout that you had. I want you to evaluate this scenario using this process. And we're going to come up with alternatives besides the two that were suggested. So spend about 5 minutes. You can work with another person if you want. And go through, and then we'll talk about what the different, how you came up, what other options you came up with, and how you evaluated them. On the back of your page is the different ethical judgments. So when it comes time to evaluating your different options, if you're not familiar with the different ethical frameworks, They're on the back, so you can take a look at that. Okay, spend about 5 minutes filling this out. Do you want to see this or do you want to see the scenario? Scenario? Okay. All right. What's that?
I was like lying to the child. It's like the analogy of lying to the professor to say that you're paying attention
In class. Yeah. Yes. Oh, this one? Okay. Does everybody have what they need from this scenario? Because I've been asked to put this up here. Oh, it's on the back. There's multiple ones, so using the frameworks, either formal or informal. Okay, I know some of you aren't done, but let's go ahead and work through this. So, what are two or more what is the moral problem statement in this scenario?
If
Yes? Okay. So moral to lie to a child if they cannot figure out that they're being deceived. What is another aspect of that? What is the other moral problem here? Situation, yes?
I wrote that, like, are you a role model for them? Are you teaching them, are you setting a bad example by lying?
Okay. So we're talking about the virtue of lying, right? And the impact that that might be. What was the other kind of moral problem that was stated earlier? Yes? Right, whether or not you honor the parent-child relationship. Absolutely. So who are the stakeholders and their interest in this? Yes? Okay. Parents, child, engineers, the design team? Yes. Who else? Might be, yes.
I mean, I think the ethics program is a stakeholder because it could look badly.
Okay.
And go the wrong way.
Right? Absolutely. Anybody else? There might be a
Perhaps the people who are running the race who are making money off of whether or not people attend.
yes. So the race, the people that are running that race, I think one other person. I think it's in this scenario. It was definitely part of the real situation. The professional driver, the other driver in there, as far as, because part of the question was, do we give the child the ability to steer? Okay? And so one of those questions would be overall safety related to that and the impact. So that was definitely a question. So moral values, I think we've identified them as far as respect for parent-child relationship, also respect for the individual. What would be some other values there as far as virtues of honesty? Might be the other thing related to that. What are some relevant facts here? Sometimes we conflate facts and values, but are there relevant facts that, yes?
The child has a disorder, a cognitive disorder that will make the lie perceived as truth.
Okay, all right. Are there any other maybe facts or things related to this? Yes?
The car is designed to make it seem like you're driving,
Okay.
regardless of know or not that you're driving or not.
Okay, so it is designed to simulate driving, whether or not by having the spring in that. Okay, what were some other options that you developed for this? What are some other things? Yes?
You say something to the child like, have a good race or good luck, but not explicitly say that you are in control of this car.
Okay, so you could say something differently to that. And I think one of the other issues too that I didn't say earlier, having them think that they have control, if this car wrecked, would they feel responsible if there was things? And I was at the Soapbox Derby. My child actually participated in a race like this. There were kids who tried to crash the car. I mean, and so it could, as you're going down the hill, there was that opportunity for that to really happen. So I think those are other things related to that as well. Yes, what were some other options?
You could tell the child that it's a team effort between them and the driver, so like they could still feel some control, but if there was something that was to happen, it's not.
Okay, so tell them that there was team control. But to some degree, you're still being a little deceptive there, but what are some other options? I think some of you mentioned it earlier. Talk to the parent individually, so you're not necessarily maybe have them talk to it. What are some design solution options here? What is the car actually doing right now? Yes?
Give a child some power to actually move the car, but still have like some main options for driving.
Right. So actually, a design option is to do a slip clutch design where the child does have ability to control it to a degree, but then the professional driver can actually override it if it becomes unsafe. So there's actually a design solution, and I think that's the opportunity for us to say that we don't necessarily have to be one or the other. Are there innovations that we can do that actually can enable to get some of those win-wins? So when you thought about the different solutions, what were the ethical frameworks that seem to be most relevant here? If you look on the back, what were the things that really came into play? And when you thought about your solutions? Yes?
I think the virtue approach, because this is all about being honest versus innocent.
Okay, so if you applied that, there was certainly one of the responses that would elicit, you would not lie then, right, if you're being honest, if you were using that. How about the rights or justice? Do we have a right to be deceptive of somebody who has a cognitive disability? Take advantage of that? Yeah.
I would feel sort of criminal, actually, sort of stifling his ability to perceive the world and trying to provide this fallacy for him.
Right. So, I mean, it could be contributing to that as well. So good. Did your different, if you thought about the different responses, if you, for example, thought about honesty, that probably led you one way, right, to thinking about it. And if you thought about rights, it might have led you to another. That's why going back to the reflection and thinking about maybe if I need to consider more options, that we can resolve that. And actually, that's where the slip clutch idea came about, because there was this dilemma on the team. Do we empower the kids with disabilities to be able to participate and keep it safe at the same time? And so then they came up with a design solution for that. So it often requires that reflection for that. So one of the things that you'll do now in a couple of weeks on your team is to actually think about how this might apply to projects that you're doing. And there are other issues related to design, as far as maybe who do you include in the design process, whose opinion you value, what is considered knowledge, those kinds of questions that I think can apply to every team. But I do know that some projects, if they're more constrained, there may not be as much opportunity for ethical reflection. I mean, it's kind of standard, and you might rely on business as usual. This is how we always do it as far as doing a particular design, and actually use that as credibility. So one last thing that I wanted to talk about is the ethics of language and people first. So I think, this is my opinion, I'll get on my soapbox related to this, but I think it reflects your appreciation for, not only your appreciation for the person, but it affects how you design. And I think when I had first started working with EPICS, I went to a design review, and a student was talking about how they were designing for this vegetable, and it didn't really matter. And so it really, not only was I totally offended by his language, I thought it showed no respect for the person, but I also thought he probably wasn't doing a very good job in design if he was disregarding all of these user needs and understanding, certainly not getting from the point of view. So in EPICS, really taking, and I think it aligns with your reflection as a designer in the language you use when you're doing your design and talking about your design. So for many of you who are doing especially access and abilities, but I think this applies to everyone, you want to use people first language. So it's people with disabilities. I have a son with autism, not an autistic son. Those are the things that really, if you're people first. And for those of you who have that opportunity, you can see that they are people first when you spend time with them. And you quit characterizing somebody by a disability, but understand that everybody is an individual with individual needs, wants, interests. And so it really makes you a better designer when you're thinking that way. Again, another one, people who use wheelchairs, not confined to wheelchairs. Too often we talk about disabilities with this really negative connotation associated with it. And so just really being aware. Different organizations have different language that's appropriate. The WCGI, the people that are there are the consumers. Learn what that language is for your project partner and how you want it, what's appropriate and respectful in thinking about this. So I think, how we design, it really does impact that. If you have any questions, here are some examples here as far as how you might use people first. And again, you want to avoid the, instead of saying stuff like overcoming disability or even really the negative kinds of aspects of that, as far as really just person is, well, they talk about successful and productive without necessarily focusing on the negative aspects related to that. So if you have any questions, let me know. There are websites and things related to that. So we are done. You will receive credit for this lecture if you turn in the Scantron or complete the MyEPICS if you're watching this on video, and complete the ethics survey. So there's no more homework. You will have an ethics discussion in your lab, and hopefully you guys will be well prepared to do that. Good luck in your design reviews next week.